What's happening everyone, my name is Alex and welcome back. For this camera comparison we have the Akaso Brave 8 and of course the Campark V40. As always we're gonna split this video into three sections. The first section has to do the internal microphone, so we're gonna find out which camera has the better internal microphone, so definitely the better sound. The next section has to do the EIS stabilization, so we're gonna figure out which camera gets better EIS stabilization. And the last section has to do the video quality, so we're gonna figure out which one films better basically. And with that being said, I think we should start by checking out some sample recordings so we can figure out which camera has better EIS stabilization. So let's check out those recordings and I'll be right back.
We are moving on to another quick recording so you can see how the EIS stabilization works between the V40 and of course the Akaso Brave 8. For this recording I'm doing 4K at 30 frames per second. At this resolution both cameras have EIS stabilization and I'm trying to hold them as steady as possible. So yeah, this is how the EIS stabilization would look like under these conditions. So on a sunny day, walking fairly slow. For our next test for EIS stabilization, I'm gonna start running up these stairs so you can see how both cameras do. For this recording I'm doing 4K at 30 frames per second once again, and the EIS stabilization is on for both of them. So yeah, Campark V40 and the Akaso Brave 8. Next we have a quick recording in 4K at 30 frames per second so we can see how the EIS stabilization does if you are going a bit faster, if you are running a bit. Of course I won't be able to run that much because I have flip-flops on, so probably not the best place to run in flip-flops, but you get the idea how the EIS stabilization between the V40 and the Akaso Brave 8 looks like. Pretty cool views from up here. So we'll keep running. Next time I definitely have to get some running shoes on. For this test for EIS stabilization between the Brave 8 and of course the V40, I am recording in 4K at 30 frames per second and I'm walking fairly slow. So I'm trying to keep the cameras as steady as possible. So this is how the EIS stabilization would look like under these conditions. Okay, so for EIS stabilization, as you've seen for yourself, there is really no comparison. The Akaso Brave 8 does seem to do much better than the Campark V40 whenever you are moving slow, whenever you are running. So basically in all situations the Brave 8 does better. However, you have to keep in mind the price difference, because for the price of the Brave 8 you can actually buy two of these V40s. So you have to keep that in mind as well. Next we're gonna move on and check out a couple of sample recordings so we can figure out which camera has the better internal microphone. And with that being said, let's check out those recordings and I'll be back right after. Alright, so for our first audio test between the Akaso Brave 8 and of course the Campark V40, I am inside the car and I have all the windows closed. So you shouldn't hear any other noise aside from my voice. It is fairly quiet at this time. For this recording I'm doing 4K at 30 frames per second with both cameras and I'm holding the cameras about 2 feet away from myself, so not that far. So yeah, this is how the internal microphone in the Akaso Brave 8 and of course the Campark V40 would pick up sound under these conditions. We are moving on to a quick audio test between the Akaso Brave 8 and of course the Campark V40. For this recording, as you can see for yourself, I am outside and it is a bit windy, a tiny bit windy, so you may hear that aside from my voice. For this recording I'm doing 4K at 30 frames per second and of course at this resolution both cameras have EIS stabilization as well. So yeah, this is how a recording done with the internal microphones on these two action cameras would sound like under these conditions. Okay, so funny enough, for the internal microphone, the Campark V40 does seem to get the better sound. However, I did notice in other recordings that whenever it's super windy, the Brave 8 does seem to cancel the wind a bit better, just a tiny bit better. There isn't that much of a difference. But overall, if you'd be to record in a quiet place, I feel that the Campark V40 has the better internal microphone. Okay, so next we're gonna move on and check out some sample recordings during the day so you can see which one has the better video quality. And well, you've kind of seen the footage up until now, so you kind of know, but let's check out those sample recordings and I'll be right back so we can talk about them. We are moving on to another quick recording in 4K at 30 frames per second between the Campark V40 and of course the Akaso Brave 8. At this resolution both cameras do have image stabilization, of course. So I'm just gonna walk slow this way. I'm gonna stop here, and here we're gonna pan left, so kind of towards the sun. As soon as we see the sea, we're gonna see the sun as well. We are moving on to another quick recording in 4K at 30 frames per second between the Campark V40 and of course the Akaso Brave 8. So I'm gonna stop here and we'll pan left slowly. So the sun is right behind us. We're gonna walk this way slowly. It does get a bit shadier around here. And I guess we're gonna turn left and walk that way for a bit. So yeah, this is how recording in 4K at 30 frames per second between the V40 and the Brave 8 would look like on a super sunny day, but a bit windy. We are moving on to another 4K at 30 frames per second between the V40 and of course the Akaso Brave 8. Once again, I do have the image stabilization enabled, and we are right before sunset, so there isn't as much light as we've had earlier. Just gonna stop here. We're gonna pan right slowly towards the sea basically. And from what I'm seeing on the screens here, the image does look much cooler on the Brave 8, but again, we'll have to see how this footage actually looks on the computer. So yeah, 4K at 30 frames per second between the Brave 8 and the Campark V40. And for those of you that like 1080p at 30 frames per second, the recordings, well, this one is done in 1080p at 30 frames per second. I personally wouldn't film in 1080p with any of these action cameras, but if you do want 1080p, there you have it. So we are kind of walking towards the sun right now. So I don't think you can see that much on the cameras, but again, I can't really see the screens because of the sun. I'm gonna stop here. We're gonna pan right, so towards this restaurant here. And if I keep going, we're gonna see Laura that's following me. So yeah, 1080p at 30 frames per second between the V40 and the Brave 8. We are moving on to another quick recording in 1080p at 60 frames per second between the Brave 8 and of course the Campark V40. At 1080p at 60 frames per second, both cameras have image stabilization. However, if you want to record at a higher resolution or higher frame rate, they do not offer image stabilization at that resolution. So for image stabilization, you need to do 1080p at 60 frames per second. That's kind of like the max. We're gonna head this way for a bit, so basically towards the sun, well, where the sun is setting. And once we get here, I'm gonna turn around. It's also quite windy here, so you're gonna hear a lot of wind aside from my voice. And I guess we'll walk this way for a bit. So yeah, this is how recording in 1080p at 60 frames per second between the Campark V40 and the Akaso Brave 8 would look like. Alright, so for those recordings done in 4K at 30 frames per second, of course the Brave 8 does much better. The videos are sharper, the dynamic range in those recordings is better from the Brave 8. So the Campark V40 doesn't do that great in 4K, in my opinion. Now, taking in consideration the price, I guess this is half the price of the Brave 8. It does okay-ish, but still, if you want better video quality, you're definitely gonna have to spend more money. For 1080p at 30 frames per second recordings, this one does seem to do a bit better than the Brave 8, but for 1080p at 60 frames per second, once again, the Brave 8 does do better. Next, we're gonna check out a couple of sample recordings so you can see how the footage looks in low light. And I'm gonna tell you from now that the footage from either camera looks great in low light. So let's check out those recordings in low light and I'll be right back. Okay, and we are moving on to a low light recording between the Campark V40 and of course the Akaso Brave 8. Now, action cameras don't typically do good at night, and this is the case with these action cameras as well. So looking at the screens now, I can't really see anything, but in reality it's not that dark out, so it's not total darkness. So for nighttime recordings, I'm gonna say that neither one does good enough to be used, basically. So yeah, nighttime with the Campark V40 and the Akaso Brave 8. And we're moving on to our second low light recording between the V40 and the Brave 8. For this recording, I got somewhere where it's a bit brighter. So now we have some street lights. I wanted to show you how this would look with some street lights. So I'm gonna pan left. I can definitely see more on the screen of the Akaso Brave 8 when compared to the other one. So yeah, this is how recording in low light between these two action cameras would look like if you have a bit more light. Okay, so just as you're expecting, neither camera does great in low light, but in between these two, the Brave 8 does seem to do much better. The V40 doesn't do good at all in low light. I mean, even on a street with plenty of street lights, you can barely see anything filmed with the V40. I don't recommend that you film with either camera at night, but if you absolutely need to film something, of course, the Brave 8 will do better. So there you have it, this was the Campark V40 and the Akaso Brave 8. Overall, yes, the Brave 8 did better than the V40, but once again we have to keep in mind the price difference. With the price of the Brave 8, you can actually buy two of these Campark's V40s. Alright guys, hopefully this video was useful, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.